Good afternoon. Thank you for attending the Getting to Know Organics, NOP National Standards webinar presented by Julia Barton, Program Associate with the Ohio Ecological Food and Farm Association. My name is Eric Pulaski. I am the Sustainable Agriculture Educator with OFA, and I will moderate this evening's presentation. This event is part of a series of educational programs offered by OFA and the OSU Veterinarian Extension to practicing veterinarians, farmers, and animal health professionals who work with certified organic management systems. OFA was founded in 1979 and is a grassroots coalition of farmers, backyard gardeners, consumers, retailers, educators, researchers, and others who share a desire to build a healthy food system that brings prosperity to family farmers, meets the growing consumer demand for local food, creates economic opportunities for our rural communities, and safeguards the environment. For more than 35 years, OFA has used education, advocacy, and grassroots organizing to promote local and organic food systems, helping farmers and consumers reconnect and together build a sustainable food system one meal at a time. Partial funding for this webinar is provided through a grant from the North Central Region Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program of the United States Department of Agriculture. And CRSARE has awarded more than $40 million worth of competitive grants to farmers, researchers, ranchers, educators, public and private institutions, nonprofit groups, and others exploring sustainable agriculture in 12 states. We thank you for this support. The questions today will be moderated. If you have a question, please type it into the question box on your screen. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to submit questions or points of clarification as they come to mind. Our presenter will monitor questions and may address them during the presentation. Otherwise, questions will be held to the designated question period. Julia Barton has been with OFA certification since 2012 and has served as an inspector, certification specialist, and program manager. In her present role as program associate, she is leading the development of strategic initiatives such as this training. I will now pass it along to Julia.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? I hope you can hear me.
I'm not seeing your screen though.
Okay. I just told it to allow everyone to see my screen.
Julia, you still with us?
Yes, can anyone see my screen?
I put the call out through the audience, but I cannot.
Okay. I'm going to try something here, Eric. Did you see that? No?
No.
Okay. If anyone can hear us, can you type in and let us know if you can see the screen? That would be super helpful.
Hey Michelle, I turned your microphone on. Can you see a screen?
It's telling me on my end, Eric, that folks can see it. I'm not sure.
I'm thinking that if I'm not seeing it, it's not being recorded. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, my dashboard says I'm viewing your screen and it's blank, black.
Okay.
You can see it over there.
Oh,
And we can hear it.
okay. Well, then just go with it. I guess there's some issue with mine. Paul just came in and said that they can see it, so let's go. My bad.
Okay. Thanks for your patience, everybody. My name is Julia Barton, and as Eric said, I am enjoying a new role here at OFA where I get to work on some special projects such as this one. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the organic standards. We're going to start off touching base about OFA just briefly. We'll talk about the USDA National Organic Program, the organic certification process, organic production basics, and this is where we'll get into kind of the standards pieces that I think everyone is really looking to learn. We're going to talk just briefly about farmers markets and organic certification and how we can communicate effectively at farmers markets with producers. And then we're going to play a little game, and Eric will unmute all of you, and we can hopefully all pretend that we are the certifier and make some decisions about how we might answer some questions that come up on a daily basis. Eric mentioned a little bit about OFA and what we do, so I won't be redundant, but if you have any further questions about the organization, please get in touch with us. Our website is www.ofa.org, and you've probably already been there because you're on this webinar. This is a picture of our team, and the gentleman there in the back, sort of, what is he, second from our left, is the Deputy Director of the National Organic Program, Miles McAvoy, and he came to visit our office last summer, so we decided to take the opportunity for a group photo. Moving right along, I wanted to give a little bit of background on the National Organic Program. A lot of people worked very hard to develop what is called OFPA, or the Organic Foods Production Act, which came out in 1990. This is the law that exists behind the National Organic Program Standards. And if this interests you like it interests me, you might like to take a moment to read the actual text of that law, because it gives you a little bit more depth and breadth to the mission and the ideas behind the standards, rather than just the rule that we're going to learn today. It gives you sort of the spirit of the rule. The standards are what we refer to as the rule. This is a set of uniform standards that assure consumers that products with that USDA organic seal, or those being advertised as certified organic, meet consistent and uniform standards. Prior to 2002, there were no national standards in place. So essentially that law, that Organic Food Productions Act, passed in 1990, and it took from 1990 to 2002, so 12 years, to go ahead and actually write the nitty-gritty standards that we're going to be learning about today. It seems like that's really hard to imagine that it could possibly take that long, but I find in working with the standards and working with producers and handlers who have such diverse and interesting operations, everything from soup to nuts and all sorts of different management practices, I can see how it would be difficult to write standards that would apply to all of that sort of breadth and depth of different types of operations. So I try not to be critical of that process, although it does baffle me that it took 12 years sometimes. OFA, as well as several other certifiers throughout the nation, did their own set of certifying from 1981 to 2002, using their own standards. And those are many of the people that were involved in the national discussion as well to create the USDA standards. But prior to that, there were labels, state to state, different organic labels that were used. Since 2002, certifiers have been able to become accredited by the USDA to certify operations to those national organic program standards. And we at OFA became certified, accredited by the USDA right away in 2002 to be able to do that. Our certification team is a team of 11 staff, plus our executive director, Carol Goland, and at any time we have 2 to 3 interns learning the process in the Office of Certification. And all of those folks work together to make the certification process run smoothly, or smoothly as possible for our clients. We certify more than 700 farms and 70 handlers, and we currently certify in 17 states, but we are accepting new applications in these 10 states that you see here on your screen. We have, like I said, been accredited by the NOP since 2002 to certify in all scopes, and these are the 4 scopes of the USDA organic standards. We've got crop, livestock, wild crop, and handling. And if you're not sure what wild cropping is, you might think of harvesting wild ginseng in the woods or harvesting wild mushrooms or berries, and making sure that there's enough of that crop left over to be able to reseed the next crop. So a sustainable harvesting practices, a lot of what is inspected in that case. There are 5 steps to certification, and every certified operator certified by any USDA accredited certifier has to follow these steps. The first step is application. So this is when the producer or handler submits what we call an organic system plan. The organic system plan is essentially a paper tour of the management practices and the details that are going on the farm. So everything from your crop rotation to the way you number and keep track of your herd, the way you identify animals when they're sick, and the products that are used on your operation, what your types of pest and disease control practices are, etc. So that application comes into the office, and then one of our certification specialists conducts what's called a pre-inspection file review on that file. He or she goes on that paper tour of the farm, and if they have any questions at any point in this process, they'll correspond with the client and touch base on, to clarify questions of management or product use, etc. We generally do that as much as we can on the phone, but also by letter and email. After the pre-inspection file review is complete, the file is sent to an inspector. We work with about 30 contract inspectors, as well as our certification specialists also do some inspecting in the field, which we think is really important and helps make them really good at their jobs. After the inspection, the inspector writes a report, which a copy goes to that certified operator or that person seeking certification, and a copy comes back to the office, at which point a post-inspection file review is conducted. So taking into account all the information that was gathered at inspection, anything that might have changed between the time when one applies, maybe in the winter, and the growing season, which a lot can change during that time, particularly with issues of weather. And then after that point, that certification specialist makes a recommendation for certification, and then that decision is then reviewed and validated by another staff person at that certification decision stage. If a client's operation is compliant, a certificate is then issued. That certificate, I think it's important to note, does not expire. It is valid until it should be suspended. So say there's a problem with the operation and a suspension of a year, for instance, is issued. That certificate would not be valid during that time. It could also be surrendered, so a certified operator could voluntarily decide that they no longer wish to be certified organic for a variety of reasons, at which point that certificate would no longer be valid. If there are major compliance issues, then a revocation could occur, or that old certificate would not be valid after a new certificate is issued. So what can change from certificate to certificate include products, acreage, even farm location when folks move farms, that sort of thing. But it's important, I think, to note that that certificate does not expire. It just is on a process of annual renewal. It's also important to note that the certificate is public information. So through this process, we as a certifier keep a lot of information confidential because we are learning a lot of details about a lot of operations, and it is not in our purview to share that information. What we can share is what is listed on the certificate. And this is what our new certificates look like. We've just started a new computer system, and the certificate is taken on a slightly new look. But the same information is there that's always been there. So the producer or operation name, the farm or facility address, those products which are certified organic, the first certified date, so the first date that someone was certified by any certifier, and then the certificate issue date. We also include on there since when an operation has been certified by OPA. Again, we do not share any other detail about a producer's organic system plan unless we have an information release form on file. Some, for instance, dairy producers, let's say they ship to a particular milk company, they might like to give us an information release form so that we can speak directly with their milk truck about their operation, for example. We at OPA really view this process of certification as a partnership between a number of different players. So we've got the role of the producer, which we view as a role to turn things in on time, communicate with the office with questions or ideas, ask questions when one is unsure, retrieve, open, and read our letters. We are required to send some correspondence certified mail or certified email. It's really important that folks pick that up and read it. Meeting deadlines and staying informed. So taking on some responsibility of learning the standards and really trying to meet us in the middle in terms of understanding what those standards mean and really following them. It's also a responsibility of the producer to keep clear and complete records and to hold on to those records for 5 years and be prepared for an on-site inspection. There's also the role of the inspector, which is, I think, really important to note and understand. The inspector is not the certifier, and the inspector does not make decisions about certification. The inspector's role is to be the eyes and the ears of the certifier on the ground. So they're doing their best to verify that what is written in that organic system plan is what's going on the ground. If there are differences in what's written in the plan and what is happening on the ground, to either update or note those differences and to flag potential issues of concern for the certifier to go back and take a look at and determine if there's a compliance issue or not. Again, the inspector never makes a certification decision about that file in that year. That inspector's role is just to be the eyes and the ears. The certifier, we think, also has a really important role in the process. We think it's our job to make the standards understandable for people, to break them down in such a way that everybody can understand what they say, because they are written, in a very bureaucratic sort of policy language. We also think it's our job to provide timely service, and that's something we've really been working on at OPA over the past couple of years, really making sure we have enough staff to complete the work that we need to do in a timely fashion. And we think it's our job to communicate directly with producers and to really understand where they're coming from, which is one of the reasons we like to have our certification specialists also spend some time in the field in that inspector role, so that they're not just looking at paperwork all day, but are really seeing what's going on the ground. Then there's the role of the consumer, and if we were all able to talk right now, I would ask you what you think the role of the consumer is. I think the role of the consumer is to ask questions and to be informed about organic certification standards and about the organic certification process, so that we can really all partner in this thing called organics and really work together to make it better. This picture at the bottom of the screen here on this slide is a picture of all of our staff and certification staff and inspectors at our inspector training last year. You can see some of our contract inspectors in action. They're a really special group. Now, moving on into the standards, I wanted to just take a minute, and I hope that you did bring either a printed paper copy or that you have access to a digital copy of the standards for our exercise a little bit later. But I did want to just orient you to the standards and how they're sort of configured so that you can look for information if you need it. The first section, and you spent a little time looking at this section during the pre-course assignment, thank you for doing that, is Subpart A. And Subpart A is section 205.1 and 205.2. Those definitions, as you probably noticed, might not be the same definitions that you might have thought of when you heard a particular term. I think the term organic is a really good example of that. Many of us, prior to learning the standards, might have thought of the word organic as meaning containing carbon, when in fact it has this whole new connotation under this federal law. I think another good example in the standards is the definition of compost. A lot of people have a sense of what they think compost is, and in the standards, compost is a very different animal. It's a very specific thing. It has to be at a specific temperature, has to be turned so many times, has to have records demonstrating that all that has taken place. So moving on to subpart B, we've got the exemptions, the requirements of record keeping, and sort of the basic tenets of organic production. And I know you took a look at that in your pre-course work as well, and I thank you for that. That's sort of the foundation of the standards, and I think having a good understanding of that really helps one to build upon the details of the crop and livestock production standards. Moving into subpart C, this is the piece we're going to really focus on today, those crop and livestock standards. So you will note there are gaps in the numbers. That's in order to be able to add additional standards down the road should they be created. They tend to leave that space in the standards for growth. So the crop standards are 200 through 207, and the livestock standards are 236 to 240. Then we move on into handling, and one important piece in that handling standard that applies to the whole rest of the process talks about a word called commingling, and that means the mixing up of organic product with non-organic product, which is a major no-no in organic production and handling. So I did want to just draw your attention to that 272, that's 205.272. Essentially throughout this whole process, organic and non-organic products may not touch each other. After we get through the production and handling standards there in subpart C, we move into labeling in subpart D. The labeling standards are really dense and I think a little bit hard to understand. I will let you know that we do have a very nice new fact sheet that Kate Schmidt-Blake in our office just created, which I think really helps break those standards down. That is on our website under our forms, and I forget what it's called now. I think it's called resources or guidance, I think is the name of the tab. And you can download that labeling fact sheet. There's a lot of good information there should you be interested in that. The next few sections really don't apply quite as much to the producer as they do to the certifier. We really have to make sure that we're following subpart E and doing all the steps of certification in the order and to the letter of the law. And then subpart F explains how we have to follow our accreditation to be certified. We are required to do a process very similar to that which certified operators do. Each year we turn in sort of a report of what we've been doing and give a lot of detailed information about how we do it. We also are inspected. We're expecting an audit here in August, and we had one 2 years ago. So those audits are about a week long. Inspectors come and interview our staff, go through lots of files, go on inspections and shadow inspectors, and take a look at our policies and procedures and how we operate organizationally. Finally, we get to what we like to call the national list, and this is the national list of approved and prohibited substances. This is the 600s, and you might hear people refer to 601 or 602 or 603. Essentially, what we're going to talk about here are the way they have the 600 organized, which this is just an example in 601 and 602. So we know that synthetics are generally not allowed in organic production. That's just a general sort of assumption that the standards take. However, there are some synthetics which are allowed, and those are listed in 601 for crop production. And then there are generally, quote-unquote, natural substances are allowed, so non-synthetics are allowed, but there are a few that are prohibited. So that's for crop production in 602. And it goes on in the 600s to have allowed synthetics and prohibited naturals for crop, livestock, and then handling is handled a little bit differently, but it's the same concept. My brain, but I'm hoping that by breaking it down here, you could understand that they're sort of naming the exception. So this is sort of our just our rundown of how the standards are organized. If this is useful to you, you can refer to it later when we're trying to answer some of the questions and pretend that we are the certifier. I think another really important thing to remember about organic production and the organic standards, I find when I'm talking with people about this who don't really engage in this every day, that the first piece that they go to is what materials are allowed and not allowed for organic production. People will say, oh, well, I heard that this is allowed in organic crop production, and that shouldn't be allowed. That doesn't make sense. That's not a good product that should be in there. And why can you apply this product but not this product? And while materials is an extremely important part of organic production and handling, it is not just about the materials. The organic system plan is like we talked about, a systems approach that looks at the whole process and the whole system by which the crop or livestock product or handled product, value-added product is produced. So we're talking about all the different types of management. We're talking about using a sort of a hierarchy of integrated pest management and disease management to take care of things. So meaning that you can't just spray every Tuesday because it fits into your schedule, but that you have to have demonstrated that you've tried different techniques to take care of a pest problem prior to using an approved substance to spray. So it's more than just that, what's allowed to be used and what's not. And today we're really not going to focus in great detail about the materials because there is another webinar specifically for that purpose by people that are much more qualified than I to discuss those details. But we are going to kind of do an overview of the standards and try to get an understanding of that. Another piece that's really important in organic production is this idea of continuous improvement. I think sometimes, at least I know the first time I applied for organic certification as a producer before I worked at OPA, I was really intimidated by the process, and I thought that any mistake that I made would knock me out of organic certification. And I was like, wow, I'm going to pay all this money and spend all this time on this paperwork, and then I make one mistake and I'm out. And that is not generally the case. It's pretty common that someone would receive what we call a non-compliance letter, so an area where a producer is not completely fulfilling a piece of the standards, but where there's room for improvement and correction, where there's a correctable issue. So people are given the opportunity to fix issues and move forward and maintain their certification. If there is a severe mistake, say the application of treated seed, or if I sprayed a field with a prohibited substance, that's where we run into issues that are not correctable. The damage is done, and we'd have to move back into a transition situation where that land would go back into transition for 3 years before it could be certifiable again. But many of the issues that come up are correctable, and so one might receive a non-compliance and then have the opportunity to fix it. Finally, I think record keeping is really essential to organic production. It is what makes us accountable to ourselves and to each other. A lot of times I hear a lot of negativity from folks who aren't super familiar with the standards about the record keeping because they hear in the media and they hear from others that it's this really big burden, and I don't. It's a lot of work, and people work very hard at it. I think another way of looking at it, and we've heard this response from some of our producers, is that it's also a gift because it teaches people good record-keeping practices that actually help them in their business. And they say, wow, I wish I had done this 5 years ago, or gosh, this has made me a better farmer, this has made me a better business person. So I think it's sort of a two-sided coin with the record-keeping. Moving on to some of the nitty-gritty now. Organic crop production. We're going to move fairly quickly through the crop production and get into the livestock standards, but they are very closely related because of the feed, the bedding, and the grazing aspects, so we don't want to ignore the crops. Briefly, I discussed a 3-year transition period. So if I have applied, let's just say, a synthetic fertilizer to my land, and then I determine that I would like to seek organic certification, I need to note the date that I used that prohibited substance, so that synthetic fertilizer. And then for 3 years from that date of application, I am now in a transition period. That is a really good opportunity for me to start learning the standards. forming a relationship with a certifier or with other certified producers, and starting to develop a record-keeping system. Because during that time period, I'm essentially learning how to be organic. So I'm learning to track all my seeds, all of my inputs, my field activity, my storage, my sale, my equipment cleaning, all of these pieces that will be required of me from day one when I become an organic producer. Again, I need to note that date of use of that prohibited substance, and that becomes my beginning of my transition date. And then I need to remember to go ahead and apply before that transition date is up. So if I come out of transition, the 3 years from that date is June 1st, I don't want to submit my application for certification on June 2nd, because that process of certification takes some time. We like to say it takes anywhere from 3 to 6 months, but that's really a very broad ballpark figure, because we really don't know, because it's such a partnership. We don't know if the paperwork we receive will be complete. We don't know if the inspector will return the report in a timely fashion, although our inspectors are really quite good at that. And we have to recognize that there are 700 plus other producers in line to receive the same service. So making sure to give oneself enough time to get that application in is really important. Organic seed is an essential part of organic production. There is a caveat in the standards that states that if the type of seed I want is not available in the quality or quantity that I need, then I may use untreated non-GMO seed. I do need to maintain documentation that I checked 3 sources to try to get that quality or quantity. The phrase that is used in the standards is if organic seed is not commercially available in quality or quantity. Well, commercial availability is a really difficult thing to measure. So the industry standard has sort of become check 3 sources that carry organic seed, document that you checked them, and if they don't have what you want in quality or quantity, you may go ahead and use untreated non-GMO seed. It is then really important to maintain documentation that that seed that I did go ahead and use is untreated and non-GMO. Another piece that's really important here is that price is not allowed to be a factor in determining whether or not I use organic seed. The price is, I guess, in that sense, not a quality of the seed. Everyone knows that organic seed is more expensive than non-organic seed. The reason that we know that is the same reason that we might want to be organic producers to receive a price premium for our product, because we are going through this additional work. And so the same goes for those who produce organic seed. Organic seedlings are mandatory for organic production, and organic planting stock, there's also, again, this caveat of quality and quantity. So untreated stock may be used, and non-GMO may be used if it is not available in quality or quantity and that documentation has taken place. Moving right along. Inputs are a really important piece to note when talking about organics. We talked a little bit briefly about sort of an integrated approach to managing pests and diseases. So there's this sort of hierarchy of different tools in our toolbox to manage these issues on our operations. And they include mechanical, physical, botanical, biological, and mineral means. If those different options do not solve the problem and they have been documented that they've been tried, then one can go ahead and use approved products on the national list, on that subpart G, to be able to address the problems. Also, and this is less of an issue maybe for some of you, but pots and trays may be sanitized using some of these different options, such as chlorine or hydrogen peroxide and some soaps. It's really important if one is not sure about what products may or may not be allowed for use to check with one's certifier. At OFA, we do send out a list of approved products. These are lists of products that are not already reviewed by another organization, such as the Organic Materials Review Institute, or OMRI. these are products that we just independently in-house. We have a couple folks that are trained specifically to do this work of evaluating materials for use in organic production. And they work really hard to maintain that list and get it out to folks when, so that everybody can be on the same page about what products are allowed. So, but if one ever wants to use an additional product and it's not on there, I would really recommend touching base with the certifier to see if we can get that product reviewed. A really, really key important part of organic standards, which I think a lot of people who helped to draft the standards feel very strongly about, is the importance of soil, maintaining and improving the soil. And with relation to livestock, an important piece of that puzzle is the use of manure. A lot of times people will ask if they can use manure from non-organic livestock. And as far as the standards are concerned, manure is manure. So manure from any animal may be used so long as no prohibited substances have been added to the manure. Sometimes people will add things to manage odor, for instance, that might have a prohibited substance in them. But in general, just manure, maybe with a little bit of bedding mixed in, is okay. There is a rule, the 90-120 day rule. So 90 days prior to the harvest of a crop that is not in contact with the soil, manure may be spread. But if the crop is in contact with the soil, such as strawberries or root crops or something, then that manure would need to be applied 120 days prior to harvest. We talked a little bit earlier about the specificity of compost in the standards, and here I laid it out for you. It really is a very specific standard about compost, what is required, how many times it must be turned, what temperature it must be maintained at, and then keeping those records to do that. Personally, I would like to try it just to see how it goes, because I think it's a really, just a very, very specific interpretation of compost. But it's in the standard, and we didn't write it. I didn't write it. It's just my job to work with them. So, so this is what we consider to be compost. Soil building and pest and weed control. There's a lot of references to this in the standards. Crop rotation is a part of the organic system plan, and crop rotations do include cover crops. These are, again, tools in our toolbox. Some of them are mandated in the standards. One must use these. One must have a crop rotation. It says that right there in black and white. So that's something that in the organic system plan people describe, and it is checked by the certifier each year. Mulching is another technique that's allowed for weed control and organic matter. Most plastic mulch is also allowed. It is important to note that some of the biodegradable plastic mulch is not currently allowed. And it's also important to note that plastic mulch must be removed at the end of the growing season from the field. And that has to do with the breaking down of the plastic. Now we will move into organic livestock production. So poultry must be organically managed from the second day of life. A lot happens in that first day of life for poultry, and that can continue to happen as it does, I'd say, quite similar to conventional production. The organic standards apply to those poultry. Livestock must be organically managed from the last third of gestation. So I know we have a lot of vets on the webinar today. You can probably think of various gestation periods of various livestock and then calculate what a third of that would be, and that must be what that the management of both the parent, whatever livestock we're talking about, and then the offspring of that animal must be managed that way from the last third of gestation. Dairy herds are another important piece, and we certify a lot of dairies at OFA. Dairy herds must have been under continuous organic management beginning at least 1 year prior to the production of organic milk. So there is something called a dairy conversion, where if I have a herd that is not certified organic, I can go through a 1-year conversion of that herd, and after that year, I can then produce organic milk. I cannot convert a single animal, but I can convert a herd. And all all of the rules that we'll go into here apply to that organic management. So feed and pasture is really important to note. I'm going to have you, if you have your standards handy, I'm going to have you go ahead and refer to them now. A good way to think about it is that organic animals must receive all organic feed all of the time. There really are very few exceptions to this. The must-nots regarding feed and pasture are listed in 237. This is 205.237. So if you do have your standards handy, take a look at that. The words must and may are all written all throughout the standards. May is obviously not required, must is required, must not is an absolute must not. And the must nots here, for instance, growth hormones are a must not. Feeding plastic pellets for roughage are a must not. Feeding byproducts of mammals or poultry to mammals or poultry, a must not. So I usually don't focus on the must nots as much because I think that's what's often done. I think it's easier for me to learn about what should be done or what must be done. But those are a few of the big no-nos listed there. Ruminants, we have really well-developed standards for ruminants, in my opinion, due to an addition to the rule that came out a few years ago called the pasture rule. This really gave a lot of clear guidance to producers and certifiers about what is required for the organic management of ruminants with regard to pasture. So at least 30% of the dry matter intake of ruminants must be from pasture during the grazing season. The grazing season must also take place, it must be documented, and it must be at least 120 days. Now, those 120 days do not have to be a continuous 120 days. Sometimes there are weather events that happen in between there that require the animals to be inside for a day or two, but the grazing season must be at least that long. From what I hear throughout the U.S., that's not really super hard to achieve. There have been a couple situations, you might remember our drought summer, where there were variances, where people were allowed in certain counties because of Vilsack's decree to meet at 15% of dry matter intake rather than 30% because of that severe drought. But generally, and currently, obviously, with all this rain, there are no variances. 30% of the dry matter intake from pasture must be achieved. Pasture management must follow all of those crop standards that we just discussed. So if people are seeding their pasture or managing it, it must be managed in that way. And then parasites must also be managed, and that goes into some of the health piece that we're going to talk about here momentarily. So very similar to the way in which we've discussed in the crop standards, one must use sort of a hierarchy of preventative methods first and then moving on to some of the heavier tools in the toolbox for management of pests and disease. The same sort of thing applies to livestock healthcare. So preventive healthcare practices must happen first. Selection of species, for instance, nutrition, housing and pasture conditions, sanitation practices, exercise and freedom of movement, and then physical alterations that minimize pain and stress. I realize some of these are quite broad ideas. We at OFA have a policies and procedures manual that we do share with our certified operators that helps to break down, for instance, what do we mean by minimizing pain and stress? Or what do we mean by commercial availability in the crop standards? So we try to clarify some of those gray areas. But in general, these are practices that I think any livestock producer would aspire to have taken care of first on their operation. If those preventive practices do not work, then approved products that are allowed in that 600 section that we discussed, that national list, may be used. Another, I think, sometimes misunderstood piece about the organic standards is that people say, well, I can't treat an organic animal because I don't want to treat it with something that will take it out of organic production. The standards are very, very clear about this. sick animals must be treated. It doesn't matter if it will take them out of organic production. Now granted, obviously one would want to use those options and practices first that would not knock an animal out of organic production, but more importantly, a sick animal must be treated. Again, we can refer to the must-nots, and I don't want to dwell on them too much, but in section 205.238, we have C 1 through 7. So for instance, if an animal has been treated with antibiotics, it must not be sold or labeled or marketed as organic. Again, growth hormones, synthetic parasiticides on a routine basis, synthetic parasiticides on slaughter stock. These are things that must not happen, and you can refer to the rest of that list. Livestock living conditions are another piece that we need to pay attention to, making sure to accommodate health and natural behavior. This piece is mandatory year-round access to the outdoors and exercise areas, to direct sunlight and shade, to fresh air and clean water, clean, dry bedding, and shelter. Again, I would think all things that we would aspire to as livestock producers. Also, we want to make sure that the housing is appropriate, the living conditions are appropriate to the species, to the stage of life of that species, and to the climate and environment in which one finds oneself. You can see some calves here in group housing. This was a pole barn that had sort of open sides. I think they had some fabric on the sides there too, but it was really airy and breezy and well ventilated. I wanted to just touch upon talking with organic producers about their products at farmers markets, because we've had a lot of questions come up about this lately. You read through the sections at the beginning of the standards that talk about exemptions, and I think it's important to note that there is an exemption for producers who sell less than $5,000 of organic product annually. These producers must comply with the organic production standards and the labeling standards. So these producers are required to do all the same things that certified organic producers are doing, which means that they must have first of all read the standards and must be keeping all the same records and must be doing all the same management. These folks may not use the USDA seal, and they may market their product as organic, but they may not use the term certified organic. We recommend that people who are falling under that exemption, that they file a declaration of exemption with an accredited certifier. That really is more for their protection. If somebody is to question what they're doing, they can say, listen, we've already been in discussion with this with the certifier. They know that we're falling under the exemption, and we've let them know. That way, I think everybody can stay on the same page a little bit better. However, should one be at market or in a place where they're coming into contact with producers and they're questioning a certification status, we recommend having a conversation with the producer and asking them about their practices, asking them who certifies them. If you're really not sure, you can always call the certifier for verification, or you can check online and check the list of certified operations. This list is updated annually in January, so that's when new producers would be added to the list. But there are folks who are suspended, and they try to add those suspensions more in real time. But I think we're not quite there yet on that, but it's getting better. But again, that certifier should be able to verify, as of today, is this person certified or not? Are they in good standing or not? One also has the opportunity, if there's a problem, to submit a formal complaint with the National Organic Program. They make it pretty easy to do that. You can use lots of different formats, and that's right there on that AMS. That's Agricultural Marketing Service.usda.gov. We now have a game, and I was wondering, Eric, if you could go ahead and unmute folks so that we can play a little game where I was hoping that everyone would be able to actually engage in kind of using the standards and discussing some of these topics together.
All right, I'm going to work on that.
Okay. I think there are there's a large number of us. I think there are about 50 of us on the webinar maybe. So I'm hearing a little more of the background noise now, so maybe others are unmuted.
Yeah, not everyone has a microphone now.
I see. Okay. Well, maybe we can do a mixture of verbal responses and then typing the messages. Does everybody have the opportunity to type?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Good deal. I'm going to go ahead and get started, and we can see how this goes. Some poultry flocks in my area have blackhead, which many of you might know is a condition that can be transmitted through larvae and earthworms. To prevent my organic flock from getting them, is it okay for me to keep them inside? Would that be true or false? Anybody?
False.
False. And who's that and why? Who was it who said false?
It's one of the musts. You must grant outdoor access at all points of the year.
Very good. So outdoor access is required. So where would we find that in the standards? Can folks locate that? Part of the point of this exercise is to hopefully get you to be able to use the standards to answer some of your own questions that might come up.
205.238 healthcare.
Okay, let's go ahead and look there. 205.238.
239 actually has the livestock living.
Yep, I was looking, and this is actually a game we play all the time in the office, is figuring out which specific standard most matches up with what we're discussing at the moment. In 238, I can see where you're coming from, talking about appropriate pasture conditions and things, but I would probably go with 239 on this one. If we look at 205.239A1, we can see year-round access to the outdoors and direct sunlight. And then we can also see 205.239A, which talks about natural behavior. And natural behavior for poultry would be what? Be able to scratch and dust, right? And peck at the ground. Okay, good. Let's go to the next one. So my dad has a conventional chicken house. Can I use the manure from his birds on my organic field? And let's try to find the citation for our assumption here. What
205.203 C1.
Very good. That talks about managing plant and animal materials to maintain and improve organic matter. Yeah. And one of them is raw animal manure. We can also cite one other there in 203. What do you think we could cite? We could go ahead and cite 203B, which says that we must manage crop nutrients and soil fertility through the application of plant and animal materials. Yeah?
Okay.
Okay. One consideration, just to muddy the waters a little bit, that comes up here, as sometimes folks take issue with arsenic in manure from chicken houses. Currently, the USDA has not been taking issue with that, with the sort of large-scale conventional chicken houses and the arsenic in that manure. So right now, we're just considering manure to be manure. I don't know whether or not that will be addressed down the road. Next question. True or false? I cannot grow the same crop on my farm in both organic and non-organic form because I might mix them up or sell some non-organic crop as organic. What's that? I thought I heard something.
Would be true.
That is actually not going to be true. That is actually false.
Okay.
So we have lots of operators that are doing both organic and non-organic production on the same farm. There are a lot of pieces that one must then pay attention to. Can anybody find what some of those might be?
I'm looking at 205.204.
You said 205, 204?
Yeah.
Okay. That's for seeds and planting stock. So that's really
Yeah.
focusing on what we need to use for organic production, right? It's not explicitly saying in here, oh, hey, it's okay to do non-organic production too on the same farm. But there are a lot of tools that one can use to manage that type of a situation if it is happening. One of them would be over in 205.202. And that would be section C, 205.202C there. That talks about buffer zones. So making sure that there is a buffer zone in between a non-organic production area and an organic production area. But just to be clear, we work with a lot of producers who have both organic and non-organic crops, livestock, and handling on their operation.
Okay.
That's very, very common. And we're happy to work with them. The other piece there that's really important to pay attention to, I mentioned at the beginning, and that's that commingling piece, which is way back there in the handling standards that discusses that organic and non-organic products must not touch. Okay? And I know we're not going into great detail on the handling standards today, but it is there in black and white. I'm going to move on to the next example.
And we can capture all that under 205.103 in our record-keeping system.
Oh, good point, Eric. Thank you. Yeah, going back to number 3. Yep, keeping track of that organic and non-organic monitoring of sales, planting, field activity, management practices in the record keeping. Thanks, Eric. Anybody have anything else on this one before we move on?
Yeah, I had one more. In 205.201A5.
Very good. Yeah, that's the commingling that's not in the handling section. That's perfect. So a description of the management practices and physical barriers established to prevent commingling of organic and non-organic products on a split operation and to prevent contact of organic production and handling operations on products with prohibited substances. Excellent. That was great. We often talk about split operation and parallel production. So if I'm growing organic and non-organic corn, that would be considered parallel production. If I'm doing an organic dairy and have non-organic crops, that would maybe be a split operation. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and move on to number 4 here. My aunt has a conventional dairy. I'd like to apply some of her dump milk to my field to increase biological activity. Can I do that?
Wouldn't it depend on what is in that milk? Because if it's waste milk, there is a chance that there could be antibiotics or medications in that milk.
That's a really good point. That's a good point. What else might we think of?
Well, back to the 205-203B that says I have to use animal materials to manage my nutrient and soil fertility.
That's the one I was thinking of, Eric, yes. So it's really common that folks want to apply milk to their fields to improve biological activity. And currently this is being treated quite similarly to manure. So although there is probably some arsenic and some heavy metals in some conventional poultry manure, the USDA is saying manure is manure. And in this case, nobody is, to my knowledge, enforcing if milk should have some residue of animal drugs in it, that milk can't be applied to the field. To my knowledge, that milk can go down, and that's the way it's been currently handled. But I think whoever that was made a really good point about what is in that milk.
This is Leah Dorman, and yeah. So basically, what you're telling me is that milk is milk, just as manure is manure, regardless of what might be in it.
That is how we've been interpreting it as a
Okay.
certifier. And
Thank you.
That's one of
As a
the
fertility
hairs,
input.
As a fertility input, yes, not as an organic product for sale, but as a fertility input. And that's one of those. There are a lot of places in the standards where we could go into that level of detail and really argue about it, and a lot of people do, and I think that's a valuable dialogue. But in terms of how it's playing out for us as a certifier right now, that milk can go down.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody have anything else, or I think I'll go ahead and move on. So I have both organic and non-organic land on my farm. Can I use straw from my non-organic land as bedding for my dairy herd? What section would we be looking in here?
I'm looking at 205.239, section A. I believe.
Oh, did you say 205-239?
Where it says it's, yep, for livestock living conditions.
Very good. You want to go ahead and read that to us?
So it says appropriate clean, dry bedding. When roughages are used as bedding, they shall have been organically produced in accordance with this part by an operation certified under this part, except as provided in 205-236-A2-1, and if applicable, organically handled by operations certified to the NOP.
Very good. So basically they're saying that agricultural bedding must be organic. Now, some folks do use sawdust for bedding, and in that case what we're asking for as a certifier is we're asking to see an untreated lumber piece of documentation from that sawmill or from their supplier of sawdust. But for an agricultural product, that does have to be organic.
Would that be for the possibility of them eating it?
I think that is probably a lot of that logic. Yeah. We all know they do, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay. I'm going to move forward here. This is more of a dialogue type question. If you are at the farmer's market and one of the vendors has a big organic sign but no certificate on display, what do you do if you're curious about her certification?
Can you come up and ask if they're certified and show it?
Certainly can. That's one way to start that dialogue, definitely. I like to ask people who their certifier is. If they say that they're producing the crops organically, I like to ask if they've read the standards, because I think a lot of times people think they know what organic means and then they've never actually kind of delved into the regulations. So I think, yeah, opening a dialogue I think is really a good way to go about it. Does anybody have any other ideas? No? Okay. We'll go ahead and move forward. True or false? One of my cows was sick, and so I had to treat her with an antibiotic. After she's well, I can retransition her for a year, and then she can still be part of my organic herd.
Oh, God.
This is a toughie.
Thanks.
I think that answer is false because don't they have to be handled organically by the standards in the last third of their pregnancy?
Right, that is
Born?
one piece. Yep, an animal must be managed organically from the last third of gestation. Here there's another piece going on. There are actually kind of two more pieces here. One has to do with the antibiotics and another has to do with that herd transition. What do you all think? Where might we go to look at the
I believe that's false.
antibiotics?
I just can't find.
Yeah, that's half the battle, right? Is finding the citation.
Yeah.
So I would recommend looking in 238, 205.238. Go ahead and start there. That's the healthcare practice standard. Can you find in that section what we're looking at? I'll give you a hint. It's in the must not section.
Oh.
So we're going to look at 205.238C1. And there it says that one must not sell, label, or represent as organic any animal or edible product derived from any animal treated with antibiotics. Does everybody see where that's at?
Yeah. So that means once an animal's fed an antibiotic, no time after that is the animal able to be used as an organic product at any time during its life.
That's the way I'm reading it. Now, there are a couple exceptions there. They talk about the synthetic substances that are allowed under 603, and the synthetic, I guess those aren't exceptions, those are just clarifications. And the organic, or the synthetic, non-synthetic substances that are prohibited in 604. So any of those substances that are not allowed can knock an animal out of certification.
Isn't there another exception? Because didn't you say chicks from day 2 of age on? So if they were treated with any of these things on day 1, they're still fine to be in organic production as long as on day 2 they were handled organically, correct?
The day 1 of the chick's life is a really tricky one. Yes, thank you for pointing that out.
So, and on one thing too, when treating their cows with the antibiotic, there are vaccines out there that they can use that are passable for the organic standards.
There are a lot of options for treatment of animals and for vaccines that are allowed.
Okay.
But when we get into the antibiotics, that gets into a really sticky area, and that's one of the must-nots.
Okay, but they follow that, then would that animal be able to be transitioned back into the herd and then considered organic then?
No, and I'm glad you
No.
brought that up. Let's talk about the herd transition. If you go to 205.236, section A, 2, and then little 3. So 205.236, A, 2, and then little 3 underneath there. It says that once an entire distinct herd has been converted to organic production, all dairy animals shall be under organic management from the last third of gestation. So that transitioning of a single animal is not how it works.
Okay.
Now, corollary
and
to
really,
that,
if
I'm
you
sorry.
have a lot, yeah, no, go ahead.
You know, that animal would need to be managed separate from the herd, but it still would be able to be used as organic breeding stock. As long as the last third gestation of the animals produced from that animal could be included in the organic herd.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I didn't go into the breeding piece too much, well, really at all in this presentation because it starts to get really intricate. But Eric's absolutely right. So that animal would have to be managed separately, but she could then give birth to an organic animal if she was managed organically.
Organically from that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It starts to get really tricky in there with the slaughter stock and the breeding stock. But I'm glad you're thinking in that direction.
Okay.
I'm going to move on here. I have a covered porch off the side of my chicken house. I leave the door open so the birds can go out on the porch if they want. Is this considered outdoor access?
Is the animal actually on a concrete porch?
Well, if you can see there, it looks like it's a wooden porch, but I can't tell exactly from the picture. But yeah, let's say it's wood or concrete.
I'd say no.
Okay, and where would you cite in the standards to back that up?
Oh, it's
Or you can tell us even the phrase or the word.
okay. It would be in the housing, and there where it says they need. Oh, where it was. Anyways, it's in there where it says that they need to have access to the ground grass.
Okay.
For the organic standards, to meet the organic standards.
So I think we're going to look in the section that's on living conditions. So that would be,
Conditions, yes.
yeah, 205.239. Very good.
There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There. A1.
Yep, you've got A there, which talks about the natural behavior, and we talked about a little bit before what the natural behavior of birds looks like. And then we've got 1, which talks about that outdoor access.
Outdoor access.
Mm-hmm. And direct sunlight and all of that. So,
Okay.
this is a pretty, I'm sure some of you are aware of the debate going on with this right now between the USDA and the FDA. There's some food safety concerns about birds coming in contact with other birds. So if they're out on pasture, what does that look like? And then the USDA standards are really explicit about that outdoor access, and the FDA maybe is having a little bit of trouble seeing the value in that. So there's a lot of debate around this issue right now, but currently this is how we interpret the standards, and we require outdoor access, so actually outside, not on a porch, out from under a roof for animals.
So their concerns is the avian flu.
That's one of the ones that keeps coming up, yeah.
Okay.
And that example I gave earlier about the blackhead, that's a real example. We've had folks, in areas that have had blackhead that don't want the animals going outside because they don't want them to be in contact with earthworms. Unfortunately, the standards don't provide for that. The standards are very clear about the outdoor access. Just got a couple more here, and then we can open it up for questions. Organic livestock can eat non-organic feed just as long as it's from transitional land.
I don't know if that's a fair question, Julia. That's kind of deep in the water, isn't it?
I know.
Yeah, okay. He thinks it's too hard. I don't know. I have faith in you all, but Eric thinks I'm being mean.
Okay, I'll answer it. I'll give it a shot. At 205.237, which is livestock feed A, it says that it has to be organically produced and handled by operations certified to the National Organic Standards.
Okay, well done. Well done. That's a good reference. Another one that I would add, and this really is getting into the weeds a little bit, talks about using third-year transition feed. So this would be 205.236. A, number 2, and then a little number 1, a little I. And this basically says that if I'm a dairy producer and I'm transitioning, for that 12 months of that dairy conversion, I can use my third-year transition feed. But that's only if it's my feed with my animals. I can't buy it off of someone else. So that's 205.236, A, 2, and a little I.
But that's specific to dairy, correct?
That is specific to dairy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you had to line a lot of stars up to get it, but you can use transitional land in that specific instance.
And that is the only instance in which that's allowed. That's why I kind of tried to focus on organic feed all the time for all animals. But there are just a couple little exceptions in here, and this is one of them. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and move on to our last example here. True or false? Organic ruminants have to have access to the outdoors, but they don't have to be on pasture.
False.
False. Very good. And where would we look to note that?
It goes back to the feeding and bedding.
Okay.
Oh, hang on a second. I've lost it.
That's okay.
I can give you one number. It's 205.237, livestock feed. Go down to C1. During the grazing season, producer shall 70% of ruminants dry matter intake. Do I have that?
Yeah, you've got a good citation there.
To provide pasture.
Very good. You could also
The
cite,
dry matter.
yeah, they're talking about the dry matter fed, but then they go ahead and note in there that the grazing season shall not be less than 120 days.
120 days.
Yeah, so that gets into some detail there. And then if we look at just below that, number 2, so that would be 205.237C2, it talks about that there must be an average of not less than 30% of dry matter intake from grazing. So those ruminants must be on pasture. Okay. That was all I had for the Be the Certifier game. After this, I've just got some resources here, and I'm happy to take questions.
Excuse me, I had a question on dairy.
Yes.
Yeah, I've read this in several places, and I've also heard it. There's a couple of people, a little bit of a dispute about it. Can raw milk be organically certified?
Can raw milk be organically certified?
Yes. Can you have, even from an organic dairy, can raw milk be certified organic?
You know, is that because of the different state and federal regulations?
Yes.
Okay, I do not know the answer to that, but I can get back with you.
Okay.
Yes. Is there a way, Eric, can we send sort of responses to answers I don't know to everyone?
Sure thing.
Or I could send you an email asking that question.
Okay, yeah, I apologize, but I know that there's been a lot of discussion about that, and I don't have a clear answer for you.
Well, no, that's fine.
Okay. There are a lot of places in the standards where either state and federal standards are conflicting. Another example would be medical marijuana. There are some folks who would like to have certified organic medical marijuana, but the state and federal standards on that are not jiving at the moment. So, so that's a really good question. I will find out for you.
Okay.
Other questions, anybody?
I'm sure the marijuana is organic.
No, ese no encuentro.
No? If there aren't further questions, if you come up with some later on while you're mulling this over, feel free to email me, and we can get those answers out to everybody if that would be useful, or you can give me a call. I am not at my desk currently. I'm working remotely, but I do check my voicemail, so I will get back to you if you leave me a voicemail message. In general, if you have questions about certification, please do not hesitate to call the office. We're happy to talk with folks about it at any time.
All right, thank you for your participation in this webinar. This webinar will be archived on OFA.org website. Look for it there if you want to review this information. Thanks, Julia. Thanks to our participants.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.